We've got a huge workers' rights story for you. Thousands of Mercedes-Benz workers in Alabama are voting on whether to join the United Auto Workers Union this week, marking a major test for the UAW. This vote comes 1 month after the UAW had a watershed victory in Tennessee, with Volkswagen plant voting to join. It was the first victory for the UAW in the South. A victory could have significant implications, propelling the union's momentum to organize in the South at a slew of additional plants. Here to discuss this is Hamilton Nolan, author and journalist who covers labor and politics. Welcome to the show, Hamilton.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, first, help us understand why this is so significant, why the big victory recently and this pending vote are so significant for laborers in the South in particular.
Well, the South is the most anti-union area in America, has the lowest union density in America. It's the place where workers are the most exploited in America and has historically been the most resistant to union power. And so to see the United Auto Workers be able to go down south and organize not a small place, but a huge factory, as they did in Tennessee with thousands of workers, and here trying to follow that up in Alabama with another auto factory with more than 5,000 workers. If they're able to do that, that could really signal a turning of the tide in terms of labor unions' ability to go down south, organize at big scale, and perhaps try to turn around the low road model of economic development that's really had a grip on the South for many, many generations at this point.
And when you say the South is anti-union, what specifically do you mean from a policy or political perspective? What makes it so difficult for workers in the South to unionize?
Every state in the South is a right-to-work state, which means that the state has right-to-work laws, which make it much harder to build and maintain unions. They allow people to be members of unions without paying union dues, which makes it hard for unions to sustain themselves economically. Also, all southern states are extremely politically hostile. There's a wide variety of laws across the South that make it harder to organize unions, that restrict what unions can do, restrict how unions can strike. There was recently a law passed in Alabama that essentially outlaws the voluntary recognition of unions for companies that are getting state money. So consistently, southern states and their Republican leaders have made it their business to make it hard for unions to operate and thrive down south. I mean, that is one of the reasons why wages are lower in the South and poverty is higher in the South than it is in other parts of the country. And so that's something that any union is going to have to overcome in order to build a power base in the South. And seeing the UAW in the past month, they're getting closer than probably any major union has been in many, many years.
You referenced harsh labor practices in the South. What are the issues specifically that the UAW is trying to rally people to want to support unionization with respect to the auto industry in the South?
Well, the South is full of auto plants, precisely because it is union free. It's a place where a lot of auto companies fled and relocated their facilities to try to escape union power. And so last year we saw the United Auto Workers win a strike against the big three automakers and score a lot of wins, score a great contract. And all of the non-union auto workers in the South saw that and said to themselves, why don't we have these things? Why don't we have these things that the union workers in our own industry have? And so the UAW was able to take that kind of enthusiasm that they had coming out of the strike and channel that into new organizing in those southern non-union auto plants, more than a dozen different factories that they've kind of committed to try to organize down south. So they've said that they want to organize 150,000 non-union auto workers in the South, which would completely revolutionize the auto industry down south. And they're really directly challenging, that proposition that the South put on the table, that the only reason why companies would want to locate here in the South in the first place is because we have low wages and easily exploited workers. The UAW is saying Southern auto workers are just as skilled as their union counterparts in other parts of the country, and they deserve to have the same pay and the same benefits as everybody else.
Can you maybe speak more specifically about what the impediments are to unionizing, what kind of mechanisms we've seen happening on the ground in the South specifically, perhaps both in this instance and in the victorious Tennessee instance, to prevent these workers from successfully unionizing?
Yeah, it's very hard to win a big new union campaign like this, even in the best of circumstances, and more so in the South. And we saw in Tennessee, the UAW did have a little bit of a benefit in the sense that Volkswagen, being a European company that is used to working with unions all over the world, did not run as much of an anti-union campaign as you're going to see from some of these other non-union auto companies going forward. And Mercedes, which is the plant in Alabama that is currently holding their election, has run a pretty standard anti-union campaign, which means that all of the workers, when they come to the plant, they're pulled into meetings. They have managers telling them to vote no on the union. The company is passing out literature saying vote no. The company is texting videos to all the workers of various local figures, including a pastor just the other day, telling them why they should vote no against the union. And they also have this kind of chorus of political leaders, including the governor of the state of Alabama and the governor of other southern states, coming out and making really ominous public statements about how the union is going to put their jobs at risk. And so there's a major fear factor that workers have to overcome in any campaign like this. In many cases, these factory jobs are some of the best jobs available in the area to working class people. And so they hold that threat of, we might have to close up shop and leave here if there's a union, to try to scare workers out of unionizing. So that's always the biggest hurdle that unions have to overcome. But I think the UAW, in being able to hold up the contract that they just won against the big three automakers, is in a pretty strong position to say, look, we're not just out here talking. We're not going to leave you out here. We just won in Tennessee, and if we can win in Alabama, it's a really strong case to all of the other non-union auto workers across the South that this is not a fluke. This is a real thing. And I think with each win that the UAW picks up, it's going to make it easier to win in the next plant.
You did say, though, that these southern states being right-to-work states is what attracted the factories to them in the first place. So is it an unreasonable fear or point to say that perhaps if they unionize here, the factories might close down and move to, like, I'm looking at the map, there's right-to-work states in the West, in the Sun Belt, in the Great Plains, et cetera. It seems like if those were the economic conditions that drove the factories to the South in the first place, it could be the case that if they did that, they would move.
Well, in the near term, I think, the fact is these are plants that companies have invested billions of dollars in. And so it's not a simple matter for an auto company to pick up and move out of state. So it is not something that companies would do lightly. And I think in the near to medium term, there's a pretty good chance that these companies will just deal with the union. If you look long term down the road, maybe decades ahead, it is possible that companies would probably not even move these plants to different states, but offshore them, which is something that the labor movement has to fight against in every industry. I mean, companies picking up and offshoring. But again, that is a threat that is made in every single union organizing drive in any manufacturing facility or blue-collar facility in this country. Management threatens or makes vague insinuations that they will close down and move. And in most cases, that's not the case. So if workers allow themselves to be scared out of unionizing through that threat, they would never unionize anywhere. And the fact is that even in right-to-work states like Nevada, there are very, very strong unions out there, and that's done by just a lot of hard work of organizing. So it is possible to organize and build union power in right-to-work states. It's just a hard job. And winning these big campaigns like the one that's happening in Alabama now is the kind of base that you need to change those states in the first place.
Hamilton, we heard a lot from Shawn Fain in the UAW just a few months ago, as there was this question of whether or not he was going to endorse, whether the union was going to endorse Joe Biden. He held out a little longer than one would expect from a union in the context of an election cycle. Also made some statements that were supportive of Palestine and critical of Joe Biden's handling of the war. And of course, we remember there was a little bit of that tussling between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, where Donald Trump said that he went to a UAW picket line, didn't go to an actual UAW picket line, but there was an active jostling for the union vote that seemed fresh and a little different than what we've seen in years past, Joe Biden being the first American president to join a picket line in this context. So I wanted to ask if either Joe Biden, who presents himself as the most pro-union president of a generation, or Donald Trump have said anything about the Tennessee victory or this upcoming Alabama vote.
Biden, I believe, did congratulate the UAW when they won in Tennessee, and sort of recognize the historic nature of that union win down south. And so, it's fair to say that the White House at least is giving, PR support or moral support to the UAW Southern Organizing Drive. I think that the UAW is probably conscious that waving around Joe Biden might not be that helpful when it comes to organizing in some of these southern states. So I don't know how much they're going to advertise that fact during their organizing. But, Biden on domestic policy has been more pro-union than most presidents of the past 30 or 40 years, and that's a fact. So the UAW was always going to endorse Joe Biden. I don't think there was ever any chance that they were going to endorse Donald Trump. Donald Trump likes the sort of appearance of being the blue-collar billionaire and stuff like that he says. But on policy, Biden is obviously much more pro-labor than Trump is or has ever been. But of course, there are limits to that, as you touched on Palestine and other issues.
Hamilton Nolan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.